Icebergs might look like just big blocks of ice floating around, but there's a whole lot more going on under the water. Well, something incredible happened. The biggest iceberg ever recorded split off. And guess what? It uncovered something that's been hidden away for centuries. From Iceberg B15, which is about the size of Jamaica, to an iceberg that held a mysterious cabin buried in its bedrock. Scientists and explorers are buzzing with excitement. Let's dive in. 1. Iceberg B15. Well, you know how sometimes nature likes to show off a bit? That's exactly what happened back in March 2000 when a massive iceberg, famously named B15, decided to part ways with Antarctica's Ross Ice Shelf near Roosevelt Island. This wasn't just any chunk of ice. It was a gigantic slab stretching about 295 kilometers long and 37 kilometers wide. To put that into perspective, it was almost as large as Jamaica. Now, this massive calving followed the lines of pre-existing cracks in the ice shelf, a spectacle that scientists say happens every 50 to 100 years. So, while it was a phenomenal event, it was also part of a natural cycle. Mother Nature doing her thing, you know? After it broke free, B15 didn't just float idly by. It started to break into smaller pieces, with the largest chunk, dubbed B15A, being a whopper in its own right, measuring around 120 kilometers in length and covering an area larger than Luxembourg. Fast forward to January 2005, and ocean currents were pushing B15A on an icy road trip towards the Drygalski Ice Tongue, a 70-kilometer-long extension of the David Glacier. On a fateful day in April 2005, B15A made quite the impact, literally, as it collided with the Drygalski Ice Tongue and snapped off two chunks, each sprawling over about 70 square kilometers. By October 2006, B15A had continued its journey, breaking into several smaller pieces. One of these, B15Z, even caught astronauts' eye aboard the International Space Station in May 2018. At that point, B15Z was about 18.5 kilometers long and 9.3 kilometers wide, but showing clear signs of breaking down further, nearing the end of its chilly saga. Throughout its dramatic journey, B15 and its offspring were under the watchful eyes of satellites and remote sensing technology, giving scientists a front-row seat to the dynamics of icebergs. We are still on the topic of icebergs. The discussion wouldn't be complete without mentioning the Ward Hunt Ice Shelf. 2. Ward Hunt Ice Shelf. On Canada's Ellesmere Island, the Ward Hunt Ice Shelf has been a stalwart presence in the Arctic for over 3,000 years. But even the old can't escape change, and in the early 2000s, this venerable ice shelf started showing signs of wear and tear. Around the turn of the millennium, satellite imagery picked up on a worrying trend. A significant crack appeared in the Ward Hunt Ice Shelf. By 2002, this had escalated into a major fracture, and soon enough, large chunks of ice began to break away. These weren't just any ice cubes. Some of these ice islands were so massive, spanning tens of kilometers, they could have hosted their own Winter Olympics. The adventure didn't stop there. As the pieces drifted into the Arctic Ocean, the plot thickened. By 2008, what was once a single solid sheet had fragmented into three main pieces. It was like watching a live-action breakup drama, but on a geological scale. This icy saga was meticulously tracked by researchers, including a notable 2008 expedition by Dr. Derek Muller from Trent University, along with some hardy Canadian rangers. They stumbled upon an 18-kilometer-long network of cracks weaving its way from the southern edge of the ice shelf all the way to the ocean. The Ward Hunt Ice Shelf had played a crucial role in damming the mouth of Disraeli Fjord, fostering a unique 43-meter-deep Epishelf Lake, a curious cocktail of fresh meltwater floating atop seawater. When the ice shelf cracked, it wasn't just ice that was lost, but also this rare ecosystem, as the freshwater swiftly drained into the Arctic Ocean. 3. Ahri Ice Shelf. You know how things can get wildly unexpected in the world of nature? Well, in September 2019, Antarctica's Ahri Ice Shelf served up a frosty spectacle when a huge chunk of ice, almost the size of London, decided it was time to part ways with its parent ice shelf. This dramatic event was caught in all its glory by satellites orbiting the Earth, giving scientists front-row seats to the spectacle. D28, this enormous iceberg spread across about 1,636 square kilometers. That's 632 square miles for those who love their measurements in miles. To put it in perspective, that's like an icy replica of the entire city of London breaking free and floating away. The main event happened between September 24th and 25, 2019. Believe it or not, it was something the scientists had been anticipating for quite some time. The Ahri Ice Shelf, where this chilly drama unfolded, isn't new to such acts. It's the third largest ice shelf in Antarctica and has a history of dramatic calvings, though the last major one before D28 occurred way back in the early 1960s. So when D28, affectionately nicknamed Molar Berg due to its shape, finally made its debut, it was a culmination of years of monitoring rift formations and cracking patterns. NASA's ICESat-2 satellite, along with the MODIS instruments on the Aqua and Terra satellites, played a crucial role in capturing the intricate details of this calving. They recorded not just the main event, but also the years of subtle cracking and splitting that hinted at what was to come. This wealth of data is invaluable, as it helps scientists understand the natural cycles of ice shelves and their long-term impacts on the environment. Interestingly, despite its massive size, the birth of D28 wasn't a sign of doom or a direct result of climate change. It was simply a natural part of the ice shelf's life cycle. This goes to show that not every dramatic natural event has a catastrophic backstory. Monitoring these events continues to be crucial for understanding how ice shelves contribute to sea level changes without prematurely ringing the alarm bells. This story rings a bell, like this next iceberg called Helheim Glacier. 4. Helheim Glacier. Back in June 2018, something rather dramatic unfolded at Greenland's Helheim Glacier, which happens to be one of the island's heavyweight ice movers. A colossal iceberg, roughly 6.4 kilometers long, give or take half the size of Manhattan, decided it was time to break free and venture into the sea. This spectacle is known in the glacier business as calving, a natural phenomenon where massive chunks of ice gracefully detach from a glacier's edge. Right there to catch all the action were some sharp-eyed scientists from New York University, with Professor David Holland at the helm. But the real MVP was Denise Holland, NYU's Environmental Fluid Dynamics Laboratory's logistics coordinator, who managed to capture the entire show on video. The date, June 22, 2018. The time, about 11:30 p.m. Local time, and the result, a breathtaking 90-second clip that shows the iceberg's great escape into the ocean. The video itself is a mini epic. It starts with a vast, flat expanse of ice, a tabular iceberg in the know, making its grand exit. Then, as if not to be outdone, slimmer and more statuesque pinnacle bergs follow suit, breaking off and flipping over in a dramatic fashion. Down the fjord, one iceberg tangos with another, resulting in a split and a spectacular overturn. Why bother with all this icy drama? Well, understanding these calving events is crucial for scientists who are studying global sea level rise. Observing such moments helps refine computer models that predict how glaciers will contribute to our swelling seas. This isn't just academic curiosity. It's vital for planning how to handle the impacts of climate change. The Helheim Glacier itself has seen better days. Once flaunting its icy might into the Sermelik Fjord back in the early 70s, it now huddles about 7.5 kilometers inland, with steep rock cliffs framing its much-thinned presence. 5. NASA finds a 130-foot-tall iceberg that's nearly a perfect rectangle. In the northern Antarctic Peninsula, a NASA scientist, Jeremy Harbeck, had his "what on earth" moment during an Operation Icebridge flight in October 2018. As they soared above the icy landscapes, Harbeck spotted an iceberg that could have easily doubled as a geometry teacher's dream project. This wasn't your usual jagged piece of floating ice. No, this one was bizarrely perfect, a sharply angular, flat-topped iceberg resembling a colossal rectangle. Standing tall at about 130 feet and stretching close to a mile in length, this icy behemoth was no small find. Dubbed a tabular iceberg, it likely took a dramatic plunge from the Larsen C ice shelf, a notorious spot for such frosty breakoffs. These tabular types are like the aristocrats of the iceberg world, large, flat, and sporting steep, majestic sides. Their formation comes from deep fractures in ice shelves, where huge chunks snap off and sail away into the ocean, still keeping their crisp, freshly calved edges. Speaking of Larsen C, Remember the Delaware-sized iceberg named A68? This huge ice mass parted ways with Larsen C not long before our rectangular friend made its debut. The proximity of Harbeck's iceberg to A68 might just suggest a shared origin story, perhaps pieces of the same chilly puzzle breaking free in succession. Now, why does all this icy business matter? Operation Ice Bridge, NASA's Eye in the Sky mission since 2009, is all about peering at these polar behemoths to gauge how polar ice figures into sea level rise and responds to the tweaks and turns of climate change. Each iceberg tells a story, not just of majestic frozen beauty, but of ongoing shifts in our planet's vast icy reservoirs. The discovery of such a neatly cut iceberg underscores ice shelves' dynamic, ever-changing nature. As these giants calve and send more icebergs into the waters, they chip away at their own stability, hinting at more dramatic changes to come. Keeping an eye on these processes is key to understanding how the poles are playing their part in global climate dynamics. They might be the next clue in unraveling the mysteries of our changing world. 6. Iceberg A68. Back in July 2017, a behemoth by the name of A68 decided it was time to strike out on its own. You won't believe the size of this icy giant. It measured a whopping 175 kilometers, 109 miles in length, and 50 kilometers, 31 miles wide. That's a total area of about 5,800 square kilometers, 2,200 square miles. To give you a better idea, it was double the size of Luxembourg and outdid the US state of Delaware. This massive piece of ice broke away from Antarctica's Larsen C ice shelf, reducing its size by a shocking 12%. What's even more intriguing is that this calving event, yes, that's what they call it, when chunks of ice split off, unveiled a part of the seabed that had been veiled in icy secrecy for millennia. Scientists were itching to dive into this newly exposed underwater world and see what secrets it held. Unfortunately, the harsh conditions and ice surrounding the area literally put those plans on ice. As for A68, it didn't just stay put. This colossal iceberg embarked on an epic journey across the Weddell Sea. Over the years, it began to crumble into smaller pieces. The biggest chunk, known as A68A, showed a bit of wanderlust as it drifted northward. By December 2020, it had made its way close to the island of South Georgia, stirring up worries about the local wildlife potentially being disrupted. But, as fate would have it before it could wreak any havoc, A68A split into even smaller fragments and ultimately melted away by April 2021. Throughout its existence, satellite images kept a close watch on its movements and transformations. Now, isn't it fascinating how even something as inanimate as an iceberg can have such a dramatic, albeit short-lived, adventure? 7. Iceberg B22. In March 2002, something massive happened off the coast of Antarctica. The infamous Doomsday Glacier, also known as Thwaites Glacier, had a bit of a dramatic episode. It birthed a gigantic iceberg, affectionately named B22, and let me tell you, this was no small baby. This colossal iceberg was about 85 kilometers, 53 miles long, and 64 kilometers, 40 miles wide, which means it covered an area of around 5,140 square kilometers. Yup, that's roughly twice the size of Rhode Island. Imagine that floating next to your beach house. The U.S. National Ice Center, USNIC, caught the first glimpses of this icy giant on March 15, 2002, through their eagle-eyed satellites. But the saga didn't end with its grand entrance. No, B22 wasn't content to just float serenely into the sunset. Instead, it decided to break up into several pieces, like any big rock star would, with the biggest chunk being dubbed B22A. This hefty fragment, still a beast at about 71 kilometers, 44 miles, by 45 kilometers, 28 miles, carried much of its original heft and swagger. After its dramatic split, B22A took a leisurely drift into the Amundsen Sea. It roamed around until about 2012, when it decided to take a break and grounded itself on the seafloor around 100 kilometers, 60 miles, from where it started. There, it sat almost like it was meditating, not moving much for around 2 decades. Fast forward to late 2022, and guess what? B22A was on the move again. By early 2023, it had drifted northwest a good 112 kilometers, 70 miles. Nature's resilience, right? You've got to wonder, What's the next chapter for B22A? Speaking of the next chapter, you should also hear about this next one called Chasm 1. 8. Chasm 1. In 2023, those who keep an eye on Antarctica's icy ebb and flow were bracing for a big change. They knew something was brewing with the Brunt Ice Shelf's notorious cracks, but pinning down the when was the tricky part. But this wasn't about climate change. So, what's the deal then? Let's dive into the icy world of Antarctica, where the Brunt Ice Shelf hangs out along the coast, joined by the mammoth Ross Ice Shelf, a chilly titan nearly twice the size of the UK. These ice shelves serve up a frosty plate of crucial environmental roles, acting as gigantic floating barricades that mediate interactions between land and sea. Hovering around a hefty 150-200 meters thick, these ice platforms can stretch or shrink by up to a mile each year. It's a natural dance of growth and decay, where eventually cracks begin to snake through the ice, leading to large chunks breaking off in a dramatic process known as calving. Think of it as nature's way of remodeling. The Brunt Ice Shelf has been under the microscope for a while now, especially after a dormant crack named Chasm 1 started to show signs of life after decades of slumber. Cue the British Antarctic Survey, BAS, whose Halley research stations are cozied up nearby. They've got the best seats in the house to watch these icy dramas unfold. Now that a new iceberg has calved, the next steps involve some high-tech ice sleuthing. Scientists are scouring satellite images from before and after the calving event to ensure the nearby research station isn't in jeopardy and to track where this frosty giant heads next. Remember the berg called A74 that broke free in 2021? This is nothing new, but it's always a spectacle. And speaking of spectacles, there's another crack on the block. The Halloween crack spotted back in October 2016. With the shelf losing weight, the remaining ice could hustle a bit faster toward the sea, potentially kicking off more cracks. 9. Helheim Glacier. In late July 2020, up in Canada's Arctic Circle, the majestic Helheim Ice Shelf on Ellesmere Island in Nunavut pulled a shocking move. About 43% of its mass, roughly 79 square kilometers, which is larger than Manhattan, decided to break free and form its own ice island. This wasn't just any ice shelf. The Helheim Ice Shelf was a behemoth at around 4,000 years old and had always been seen as the stable one, especially since it was twice as thick as its neighboring shelves. Tucked away within Milne Fjord, it seemed protected and poised to outlast others. But then came the summer of 2020, with record-high temperatures that really turned up the heat on the ice, leading to massive surface melting and pesky melt ponds. These melt ponds are like the ice shelf's worst enemy because they add weight and mess with the shelf's internal structure. Talk about internal sabotage. What's particularly heartbreaking is the ecological thriller that unfolded. The Helheim Ice Shelf was not just a giant block of ice. It played a critical role by acting as a natural dam. It held back meltwater, creating a rare Epishelf lake, a fascinating place where freshwater floats on denser seawater. This unique setup was home to creatures like scallops and sea anemones. With the ice shelf's collapse, it's likely this extraordinary aquatic world drained away, spelling trouble for its inhabitants. Derek Muller and his team from Carleton University had their eyes on this icy giant for years, studying its every move. You could say they knew Milne better than anyone else, yet nature always has a way of keeping us on our toes. Now, as we think about this massive break-off, one can't help but wonder, what's next on the list that could surpass this? 10. Alaska's Columbia Glacier. In the early 1980s, while most of us were grooving to disco or rocking out to the new wave, Alaska's Columbia Glacier decided it was time for a dramatic change. This glacier, nestled in the Chugach Mountains and flowing elegantly into Prince William Sound, began retreating faster than any paparazzi-chased celebrity. By 1986, it had retreated a staggering 20 kilometers and lost about half of its volume, a real slim down that would make any diet guru jealous. Then, in the balmy days of July 1986, the glacier served up a blockbuster spectacle. It calved one of the largest icebergs ever recorded. But the real shocker came when this colossal iceberg floated away, revealing a secret that had been snugly tucked under the icy covers. A mysterious structure buried in the bedrock. Cue the entrance of Dr. Emily Thompson and her team of eager glaciologists and archaeologists. By mid-August, they were at the site, standing before a wooden cabin that seemed to whisper tales of the old frontier. This was no ordinary find. The cabin, measuring a cozy 4 meters by 3 meters, was packed with artifacts that screamed early 20th century vibes. Tools, clothing, and even handwritten notes that felt like time travel tickets back to the days of trappers and explorers. Radiocarbon dating was like the cool science teacher that pieced together the cabin's history, dating it back to around 1910. This was the era of rugged adventurers who probably never imagined their temporary home would turn into a frozen time capsule. Dr. Thompson couldn't hide her excitement. Discovering this cabin offers a unique glimpse into the lives of early settlers in this harsh environment. The glacier's retreat, while concerning, has unveiled a time capsule from the past. Every piece of this icy puzzle was meticulously documented and carted off to the University of Alaska for further study and safekeeping, shedding light on what life might have been like in those unforgiving conditions. 11. An 11 million ton iceberg looms over Greenland Village. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place, or, in this case, between an iceberg and a village. In 2018, the residents of a small coastal village in Greenland faced a chilling scenario. An 11 million ton iceberg, the size of which they'd never seen before, parked itself alarmingly close to their village. Measuring a whopping 650 feet wide and soaring nearly 300 feet above sea level, this icy giant loomed like a frosty skyscraper over the town of Innersuit. The village, home to 169 people, found itself playing a precarious waiting game with nature. You see, the iceberg's fate, and consequently the village's, hinged on the weather. Favorable strong winds had the potential to push it away to sea, averting a crisis. However, a heavy downpour might just tip the scales, causing the berg to fracture and send colossal waves rushing toward the village. Carl Peterson, the local council chair, encapsulated the town's anxiety. Speaking to the Canadian Broadcasting Corp, he admitted, "We are very concerned and are afraid. It's one thing to live with the constant companionship of icebergs, but an iceberg this colossal was unprecedented for them." As tensions rose, 33 residents were evacuated to higher ground. Meanwhile, others scrambled to move their boats to safer waters. The iceberg posed a significant threat to more than just their homes. Innersuit's power plant, situated precariously on the coast, was at risk too. Any significant wave action or a rise in sea levels could jeopardize the entire village's power supply. In terms of logistics, Innersuit isn't the easiest place to reach. Located about 600 miles north of Nuuk, Greenland's capital, the town is most accessible by boat or helicopter, with many residents relying on hunting and fishing for their livelihood. Susanna Eliasson, another member of the village council, told CBC, "We can feel the concern among the residents. We are used to big icebergs, but we haven't seen such a big one before." While a Danish Royal Navy ship stood by, ready to assist, all the villagers could really do was watch the skies and hope for the best. Imagine living with the constant threat of having your entire way of life upended by the whims of weather and ice. It begs the question, how well do you know this glacier called the Pito Moreno Glacier? 12. Pito Moreno Glacier. The story of the Pito Moreno Glacier is a saga filled with the thirst for adventure and groundbreaking explorations that sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. Back in October 1867, Captain Luis Piedrabuena wasn't content with just hearing about the wilds of Patagonia. He wanted to see it for himself. So he put together a daring crew led by the intrepid Guillermo Gardner, and off they went to explore the Santa Cruz River. They journeyed along its south bank, passing what's now El Calafate, all the way to Lago Roca. This wasn't just a sightseeing trip. They were laying down the vital groundwork for future explorers, marking water sources, pastures, and hunting grounds. Fast forward to November 1873, when Second Lieutenant Valentin Feilberg took up the mantle. He and his team blitzed through the area in 22 days, and in a burst of patriotism, they planted the Argentine flag and left behind a document at what they mistakenly thought was Lake Viedma. Oops. However, the real headline act came in late 1876 and early 1877, with none other than Francisco Moreno, affectionately known as Perito Moreno. Alongside Carlos Moyano, he not only navigated the Santa Cruz River, but on February 15, 1877, stumbled upon the breathtaking Lago Argentino. Pushing north, they reached Lake Viedma and significantly deepened the world's knowledge of Patagonian geography. The glacier itself first got its celebrity status in 1879, thanks to British Chilean Navy Captain Juan Tomás Rogers. Initially, he named it Francisco Gormaz, honoring the director of the Chilean Navy's hydrographic office. Then, along came Rudolf Hauthal, who thought Bismarck seemed fitting, a nod to the Prussian chancellor. However, it was Pito Moreno's name that eventually stuck, a tribute to his relentless exploration and his role in securing Argentina's borders. So, what do you think? Which part of this incredible discovery surprised you the most? Have you ever imagined what secrets might lie beneath the ice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories like this one.